Hello everybody, welcome back to the elliptical table build. Last time I asked if you all wanted to see the full process and you overwhelmingly told me yes, so I have decided to make 2 more videos and go into as much detail as possible. In this one I will make the top with some inlaid banding and hand-carved moulding around the edge. And next time I'm going to finish it with a central column and 4 serpentine legs. So let's get into it. To start with, I need to cut some cherry to length for the tabletop. The top is of course elliptical, so I'll first cut one piece to the full length. This will be resawn into 2 boards for the middle of the top. Then I can lay that on my full-size drawing and easily measure how long the outer pieces need to be. I'll cut another piece to that measurement and then draw a rough center line along all edges to follow with a rip saw. So, is anyone playing Elden Ring? That's what I'm doing right now when not resawing or video editing or working. So admittedly not a lot, but yeah, it's pretty great, especially after a resawing session. Anyway, then I could flatten the boards with scrub plane and winding sticks. And edge joint them to prepare for glue up. I don't need to smooth anything at this point, just need one face to be flat enough to register a square against, so the edges end up straight. It's always a challenge to glue up tabletops in my small shop, but this time I rigged up a support with a scrap clamped to a sawhorse at the height of my bench, so I can lay the clamps along the length of the bench and the boards perpendicular to that. This worked really well for a top this size. You can see how the boards are still rough sawn on this side. So with the glue dried I could scrape off the squeeze out and then plane it flat. Then it's time to scribe the final thickness onto the edge and plane the underside down to the line. With the top thickness, I cut out my drawing and turned it into a template and used the central glue line to align it. A quick check with the apron to make sure I don't do anything stupid, and it looks to be alright. This is a turning saw, basically a big coping saw. It's the first time I'm using it, so I'm a bit wobbly, but it's a very fun tool and aggressive too. Made quick work of this curve. I cleaned up the biggest errors with a scrub plane, checked for square, and faired the curve with a spoke shave. Spoke shave on cherry has to be up there with the most pleasant things in life. This is the first time I'm using cherry too, by the way, and yeah, it's a strong contender for a favorite. But now it's time for inlay, and for that I'll start with edge jointing some birch. I'll then set my marking gauge to 1 mm and scribe a line and saw off this thin sliver of material. One side is planed, but I need consistent thickness, so to plane the other side I put down some double-sided tape. Not sure how much this helped, but I tried to remove some of the stickiness here to make it a bit gentler on the thin wood. Then I removed the saw marks with a finely set smoother. I also want some mahogany for the inlay, and I want to use it with the end grain facing up, so I have to cut cross grain pieces like this. A thought on wood selection. What I'm doing is what would traditionally be done with holly and ebony. I have neither of those. Birch I think is a logical substitute for the white, but why not walnut for the black? Well, the main wood of the table, cherry, will darken to a warm medium brown with age. Walnut, while it's a lovely rich chocolate when freshly finished, will au contraire fade with age to a warm medium brown. So the contrast there is somewhat lost. Mahogany is like cherry and darkens, so while the contrast is not as strong as it would be with walnut, the woods will age in concert and the contrast that is there is maintained. That's the idea at least, and putting it end grain up will make for the darkest possible line. What I'm doing here is a two-step glue up around the tabletop as a form, so the inlay will already be close to the radius I need to bend it to. And I'm doing it in two steps since I had to tape together the cross-grain pieces. I don't think it'll be a problem gluing it up like this. The veneer is thin and shouldn't be able to overcome the glue. When the inlay banding is dry, I can rip it in half, as it is currently much wider than needed. Then I set up my mortise gauge to make two lines, one inlay banding's thickness apart at the offset I wanted from the edge. And here's why I made the shoulder knife. If you didn't see that video, this is an old way of cutting recesses for inlay, and it is extremely effective. I'm still learning to control it, but I'm getting there, and cherry is very smooth and even in texture, so it feels like an easy wood for a beginner. I chopped out most of the waste with my smallest mortise chisel and then cleaned up the recess with my tiny router plane. I'll glue the inlay one half at a time, as they are currently a bit long and will need to be trimmed, and that's easier when one is glued down. One of these quick grip clamps is pretty convenient for pressing the banding into the groove. A section broke off, but it was a clean break, so I'll just glue it in at the same time and the seam should disappear when planing the surface smooth. With the glue dry, I can cut off the excess, and I'll use my Japanese saw for its small amount of set. I put down some tape in an attempt to save the cherry from scratches, but it didn't really work, and the scratches are so shallow anyway, planing them out was no problem. I found the point where I wanted the halves of the inlay to meet, and made a cut, and then dry fit the second piece in place and made a knife nick where it needed to be trimmed. Alright, next up I want to make a bead along the lower edge of the apron. These are offcuts from the column, which is not done yet but will be shown in the next part. I'm rough cutting these offcuts into shorter sections that I can plane in my thicknessing jig to start with. When they were all taken down to the dimension I wanted for the bead, I used the same method as for constructing the apron, so no angle measurement, just eyeballing perpendicular to the curve, and then making the next piece fit whatever angle that ends up being. Then I glued them down, making sure to really press the ends of all the pieces together. This bead is partly decorative, adding visual balance to the top, and partly functional, protecting the lower edge of the veneer when moving the table. Washer trick for drawing an offset. Don't know where it originates, but I learned it from a Laura Kampf video. To make this into a round bead, I drew a center line, and then I used a spoke shave on the underside to remove the bulk of the corner, and a chisel on the other side, careful not to cut against the grain or stab it into the veneer. Then a gouge comes in, rounding over the facets. A few spots of tear out got removed with a card scraper, and finally I did some light sanding. It's time to attach the apron to the top, and I had this offcut from the bricklaying that of course is a perfect fit in these steps on the inside, so I thought I could use that and save some time. I'll have to cut it into 16 pieces to make 8 buttons. Along with the buttons at the apron, I needed a way to attach the top to the beams as well, so I picked up some small angle irons. Then I could find the position and drill some pilot holes with a tape flag on the bit so I don't go through the top. The buttons go in next. I tap the screws lightly to get the locations for more pilot holes. And with that, I was finally ready to smooth the top, now that it's locked down to the apron and won't warp anymore. And after that, I can start marking out the moulding. Is it called moulding when it's not applied, but carved right into the piece? I'm not sure, but that's what I'm doing. I'll start by making a square step down. Then I'll mark another line where I want a cove to land. I wish I was a good enough carpenter to get a finish-ready surface off the gouge, but I'm not, so I wrapped sandpaper around the dowel and knocked down the unevenness. Then the lower part of the moulding gets shaped into a bead, just like below the apron. And to smooth that out, I made this sanding block with a matching groove. I only filmed the first grit, but on both parts of the moulding I brought it up to, I think, 600 grit. And there we have it, that's the top completed. All that remains now is a central column and 4 serpentine legs, and of course a finish. So I will see you next time for the final part of this series. Thank you for watching.